Welcome to Safety Justice League.
The next time I have to come in here, I'm cracking skulls.
Beef jerky out, his black coffee in his hand, and he is interviewing a nobody.
Oh my gosh. Don't.
We're sending you back to the future.
NSFW.
I'm your number one fan.
Get my mental druthers ready here.
You need to do that red leather, yellow leather.
What is that, like a tongue exercise?
Unique New York. Unique New York.
There you go.
Watermelon.
Any monkey business is ill-advised.
All right, let's get this started. Mute your people.
Mute.
Okay, now I'm gonna want to swear. I won't swear.
We're on a mission from God.
What one question though? Can Redbeard's beard actually like do some superpower stuff? I mean, that thing is getting big.
You can't handle the truth.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here on another episode of Safety Justice League, and this is a very special one, to steal Jason Lucas's words, because this is the first episode that the four of us have ever done with a guest, and we are honored to have with us Dan Snyder. So, Dan, I've got something, and I'm going to let you kind of break in with your origin story here in a minute. But I've got a little story that I thought you might find interesting. So I think it was back in 2010, I took your ASP prep course in Las Vegas. Great course, learned a lot. I took, and these guys know what kind of notes I took. I took 2 full pages of notes, which was more than I took in college, both times. And then I waited 2 years to take the test, and I broke out the notes, and I'm pretty sure I wrote them in a different language. So they didn't help much, but the class was great.
Well, yeah, that's good to hear. And I think I remember you in there. I think stole a photocopy of your notes on a break, and I used that for my next version of curriculum. That's how good they were.
Hey, they were awesome. There's a couple of gophers in there and an alien and a snake. Always put a snake in there.
Yeah. They only make sense if you know the code. But no, it's interesting you say that about the 2-year wait, and you suffered that a lot of people do. The work and life gets in the way, and that was one of the things I always tried to emphasize in those workshops is, hit while the iron's hot, because, there's a finite amount of extinction that's going to happen when you wait for taking the test. But no, I'm glad hopefully it helps you, the materials, and you passed.
I did pass. So I'm thinking it helped quite a bit.
Yeah,
I was getting worried about this whole premise of this show if you didn't pass.
Yeah, I failed. It was the worst thing ever. No, I passed first time.
Hey, welcome to the show, Dan.
Yeah, great. We just wanted to rate, your stuff was horrible, No, it was funny. I was talking with a couple other people, and we got on the conversation of influence, which is really where my research takes me now, and did a lot of work with the dissertation work on the ideas of influence. And it kind of leads into our adaptive facilitation talk a little bit, but how do really safety professionals influence? And we got to talking, and one group I was working with, we calculated up what our potential influencers were and kind of how to do that. And I'm, as a geek that I am, I'm actually working out some kind of a permutation for it, to where how could we really measure or quantify in some way the ways that we influence and how many people we influence, and this idea of exponential influence, to where, look at everybody here on the call are pretty solid influencers. How many people you touch or that you're with that plant a seed or an idea or reinforce, the activities they're doing. And so, it's quite a bit. And so I know that, in my tenure with Span, before I sold Span and doing exam prep and all that, I think I calculated we had 20,000 exam prep customers through the time that I was there, you, Jason, included. And so, you take 20,000 professionals that you're spending time with or writing materials for them to study and pass a professional certification exam. And then what they do with all that knowledge, going out in the world. It's and then all the people they touch in their organizations, and then their families, and 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing. And
it's actually 6 degrees of Abbey Ferry, just so you know.
Well, at least in the safety world.
Yeah, I think that would be a fair thing too. And as many people as Abby touches on that. So So yeah, that idea of, facilitation, and kind of where I started with it is in the training education phase. When I first got into the business, it was right on the heels of HAZWOPER, 1910 120 and waste site worker and all that, when those regs came into effect in 1990. So I cut my teeth on a lot of HAZWOPER hands-on training and mixed training, and what I found is a young 24-year-old, teaching hazmat technicians and stuff like this, is I was usually the youngest guy in there, and I was supposed to be teaching it. And what I found out real quick, or what I defaulted to, is it was really survival, and that is, I really don't know that much, and all these people around me know a lot more about it than I do, so maybe I can get them to talk. And what I found is what was survival for me. I learned in the process by listening to the experienced people, and really kind of facilitated more of a discussion about how they respond and their ideas about it and the dangers of the chemical and their perceptions of risk, and all these other things that came about. And I found myself learning probably more from them early, for sure, than maybe they learned from me. But the feedback I'd always get is they didn't understand anything about chemistry. And so toxicology, chemistry, the chemicals themselves, how they work, really signs and symptoms, and all the gobbledygook on an MSDS, back then. Now it's a safety SDS. But and I was able to interpret those in ways that I felt and they felt that they could, understand and use, and it made meaning of it. And so it was really an interesting shared role. I was able to make meaning over things that, these guys in industry and maintenance, smart people, geniuses, but, they're not real savvy on teratogens, really what that term represents. And so they shared with me some of the real world part of it and aspect, and I shared with them a little more depth knowledge of how scared should you be of it. And it wasn't until I worked or got to my master's program at the University of Arkansas in adult ed and human resource development, where I realized that, wow, there's whole theories dedicated to adult learning. And what I was doing out of survival, and it felt right, and the people seemed to respond to it in a real participatory experiential learning environment. There's several legends that have written about that and discussed it in detail, all the way to some of the neuropsychology of learning. And so it really, this facilitation idea really spawned or bring itself to the front foot. And adult learning, facilitation, is really just helping adults learn. And facilitation, as it's kind of expanded in our world as safety professionals, it's really matching people to people and resources to people to facilitate learning or progress or getting things done or implementations and things. And so it's more than just training. It's more than just instruction. You really have to facilitate and kind of work a culture, if you will, and leverage some influence and learn about the people you're working with and learn how you can best assist them as a servant leader. And so I think the idea of facilitating information and facilitating resources, information being one, or connecting people together to be able to work together to accomplish certain things, I think that art is something that is a good trademark for a real solid professional to be flexible and dynamic to do that. And that's kind of the adaptability part. So an adaptive facilitator for me is somebody who is really pretty high on the EI scale, as far as really reading the audience they're with and reading the learner or the people that you're communicating with and learning from them, and a lot of active listening skills and things like this that allow you to come to and reach consensus. I think that's the thing with adaptive facilitation, is this census building of what should we do. Look at things like defining acceptable risk. If we're working with a group to define acceptable risk, our role is really that of facilitator, from those that are doing the job, for those that are managing projects, management all the way up and down.
Dan, if you're working with a large organization, like let's say over 10,000, and you're trying to manipulate the culture and facilitate learning and try to get everybody on the same page as far as taking ownership of safety and understanding the real fundamentals, the challenge is communicating, and everyone communicates on different levels. And so I was kind of wondering if you had any tips as far as how to approach managing that. Like what is a way to do that effectively in a large organization?
Yeah, well, in a large organization, obviously, you have to develop a team to do that. It's not one individual as in a company that size. So, let's just say we have 10,000 in a major company. Say it's a global company, and you're the head vice president of, you're the CSO, chief safety officer. You're in charge of all of it, and you have a team of maybe 30, safety professionals, EH&S, sustainability, environmental, all that under you. um, you really put yourself in, you can only facilitate through your team for the most part. And so now you're in a position of actually creating your team to be facilitators to go out, and then they would work with certain teams within their region or within their facilities that they oversee, all the way down to perhaps even another layer of site coordinators, site safety people. So when you're looking at that large of a scale, quite honestly, it means that you're in a position as a top leader to set the vision with the management and the owners and the leaders of the company, and then create that space for safety and safety culture to flourish, and really make sure the safety management system is robust on all the technical points of it, but to invest in a team of safety professionals internally on influencing skills and emotional intelligence type skills, to where you're listening a little bit more than directing. And I think that's a shift or a pivot in our profession that we're going to see realizing even more, that as we move away from perhaps a compliance oriented idea into more of a systems idea, the hops, for example, or any of those, to where you're really looking at a more systematic approach. I think it requires a little bit different skill set, because we're putting ourselves out of a technocrat to where we're looked at as a technical geek on safety regulations and OSHA and these kinds of things, and perhaps engineering and that. And really looking back to some of what Dr. Peterson really wrote a lot about and was a forerunner about, and that is this idea of, people. Safety is a people problem, and you have to really be able to work with people to find solutions. And so I think it's the team approach.
I want to key in on one of those things real quick, because before we get too far, you mentioned something about, a lot about emotional intelligence and all these different, people call them soft skills. It's probably a crappy way to describe it, but the idea of taking safety as an influencer in an organization, and this is just sort of a concept that I've kind of tinkered with in my mind for the past couple of years, where I think if an organization would be willing to try this, because it would totally be an experiment, where you assign some strictly technical people to, along with maintenance hands or engineers or whoever they would need in order to actually get physical work done, and make that your compliance division of your safety department. And then, like you're saying, Dan, take maybe some people that are a little bit better at communicating, a little bit better at doing what you said, reading the room and understanding what motivates people and how to get them to do things and think it's their idea. Inception-based safety. I just coined that, right? Yeah, I just coined that right now. You guys, we're going to make $1 million.
Yeah, there you go. It's all yours, man. It's yours.
Safety.
Yep. Count it. Hashtag it.
Like the movie.
I like conception-based safety too.
You better buy the domain before Sheldon grabs it.
The immaculate inception of safety, if you really want to go that far.
Wait a minute, isn't there already? You know what? I'm wrong. There already is conception safety. My bad, y'all.
Yep.
My bad.
That is a well-defined field.
We'll put the Greek terminology in front of it and change it altogether.
I'm dying over here as I just got it.
Right.
Okay,
and
go on.
Everybody has their strengths, and and I've worked with teams to where obviously there's people that are very good at their technical background, and that's really where they like, and that's where they rely on, and they're kind of the muscle in the way of the credibility factor. And so when we have some of those really intelligent people working on those problems, technical problems, safety issues, and kind of looking at the compliance piece of that, that's one skill set. And I've known a lot of people that were excellent in the field, and they could really make things happen in the field, whether it's a personal relationship or whether it's through compliance and all that other good stuff. And they really aren't happy at a corporate level. I've seen some site managers, site safety professionals that have advanced into a corporate world, and really after 2 or 3 years, quite frankly, got out of it and went back to the field or went back to the floor. And I think that the same thing where you've got somebody up that's very, very good at the politics and the upper level communication of running a directorate level, and the give and the take and the really planning the strategy. They could be very well with that, but if you put them on the job site or out on the floor with the workers, they just don't resonate.
Yeah,
And
I think
so all of us have our own. I'm a field guy. I come out of the airborne infantry. I mean, I can go out and talk to at various levels, but I think what I find with the skill development of EI is I'm finding that those skills can be developed to where if you can take an old grunt infantry guy like me and be able to get a doctorate and speak like I have an education to a bunch of CEOs, and then the next day or later that afternoon, go put a spit and chewing tobacco in and talk to some construction guys about fall protection. That's a wide range, and some people can have that opportunities and can thrive in some of those where others are very, very good at what they are, and so there is some real character traits that we all share of what our strengths and weaknesses are. But at the end of the day, I think that development of how you could do a little better on making your case, because even if you're the smartest compliance or technical guru 180 IQ person, if you're unable to facilitate the meaning of what you're saying or what you're wanting to communicate, it's really kind of all or lost. And I think we find ourselves a lot of times in safety being a liaison between different departments to try to interpret, the real meaning of safety. What does it mean to be safe at this location? And I think defining that meaning, defining those risks, really takes a skill set to bring that consensus. It's not just about black and white rules, or it's not just about that. It's a lot about context and the context in which things are in to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Dan. I've got to admit that your certification level is a little overwhelming. You have like a full alphabet soup behind your name, and I want to kind of get a little bit into what all the certifications are that you have. Which one is your favorite? Which one do you think is the most valuable for you as a safety professional?
Sure. Yeah, that's it's kind of like asking about your, what's your favorite song? I love all of them. I'm kind of a geek like that, but a lot of it has to do with the drive of learning. Even though an interest in good exam prep and taking all these exams to support the work I did with SPAN, to have the best exam product out there, it just put me in a position to really study the exams and study the competencies of the exams. And that's really where I think I'm at now after 10 years. I think I have a pretty good grasp of, I think in my research, I came across 2,000 competency statements that came off of certification exams, and used that as part of my research on what does it mean to be a competent safety professional. And so I like each one of them. The ones I have are mainly with the BCSP branding. At one time, I think I held all of them one time, and I think I might have let my ASP go on the last cycle. But and then I've had my CHMM, Hazardous Materials Manager. But of all of them, I think one of my favorites is really the SMS, the Safety Management System one. It's a new one that they came out a couple of years ago, and I just found that it's designed for professionals that they worked for a living. They didn't go to college, and so these are people that have 10 years experience, solid experience. And I think that the questions that are asked on that exam are probably the most interesting. I think they're the ones that reflect most accurately where we are as a profession. And the exams are designed to reflect that. They're updated about every 5 years with a new blueprint. They do a lot of surveys, a lot of statistics, and they try to figure out, what does it mean to be a certified safety professional right now? And so,
and speaking of that, Dan, real quick, the SMS, do you happen to have that blueprint? Because I'll be sitting for that one soon.
Yeah.
So I was hoping
I wrote
you
the
have
book,
that.
man. I've got the book for it.
So we need to talk a little bit.
Click has it. I sold it to them.
Yeah, you sold it to them. So I had a question though. How many times did the SMS came out in 2017, I think, right? Somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So I took it during the beta exam process.
So
And I got to disagree with you a little bit, at least unless it changed. And this is what my question was. How many times did you take it? Because that first time I took it, I thought it was really repetitive.
It was repetitive, but that's a beta, and that's by design. Because on a beta, you're going to do 260 questions, and what they're doing is they're doing the false positives and really ensuring which, when they look at psychometrics, they're going to look at the top 20% of test scorers, and so those that have scored 80% or better, and they're going to look at, let's just say all of us on this call, we are in the top 20% test takers on that test. And then they're going to look at our answers. And let's just say that, 2 of us answered a question one way and 2 of us answered the same question a different way. And then we found some consistencies among those top test takers. And what we're finding is, why are the smartest people taking these tests missing this question consistently with the same wrong answer? And what they'll find is that, there's some nuances there to where one professional can interpret it this way and actually be correct, and then another one interpret a different way, and then they'll redo the question. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to find the most accurate, statistically defensible questions that represent from the beta group that then they turn around and make into the exam. So there is some modification usually or adjustments made. But literally what they're going to do is they're going to throw out 60 questions. They're going to get 200 out of the 260 that they feel, scored most accurate. I think, and so you're right, it was redundant and there was things, but I think what I enjoyed about it is I think it got away from a little bit of the, Google it, dude. It got away from some of the technical stuff that I can look
Nate
that
has
up.
a question,
And it was much more situational. It was much more humanistic in psychology and the way I think they were written and what they were trying to go with. And so I think it really did reflect what I would expect a really good senior 10-year veteran safety professional to be able to know or be able to interpret or be able to do. And I also like that it kind of branched out a little bit into the realities of the interdisciplinarity of our profession, where there's a little bit of project management, a little bit of HR, there's a little construction, there was some general industry, there was some consensus standard work, there was a little bit of philosophy, there was a fair amount of ethics.
Well, in your case, there's some amusement ride inspector background as well, right? I was snooping on you, and I saw that.
I thought that file was sealed.
Well, here's the thing. I had a question for you about that. I really wanted to know, because every time I go to the Iowa State Fair, or do I go to one of these little carnivals, my son's like, hey, let's go on these rides and stuff. And I'm just looking at him like, I don't think so. I don't know about that. So I have to ask you, which rides would you never ride on being an amusement ride inspector? I need to know this because I'm paranoid. You need to either cure my paranoia or confirm it.
Wait, before you answer, I have to tell you my wife's thoughts on amusement parks real quick. She said she always told my oldest son that we couldn't ride any rides because if the workers don't know how to brush their teeth, we can't trust that they'll put them together safely.
There's some truth there.
Sound advice.
The carnival background is really fun. I was stolen and kidnapped by a carnival. That's how I was raised. But my role with that was really doing a job with Silver Dollar City. It's an amusement park in Branson, Missouri, and they hired me to write all their high risk ride manuals. And so to do that, I realized, that there was this NARSO Ames, amusement ride inspector and all that kind of stuff. So I started going to those conferences to learn about the business. And ended up taking the exams. And in Missouri, to inspect rides, you have to be a state inspector, which is, you pretty much show that you're all that, and they grant it to you. So I really didn't do a lot of that.
There's no bribes involved in that?
No, they try. Believe me, I'll tell you, I've seen the most bribes offered in that range, I think, than anywhere else.
Oh, I just meant to become an inspector.
Oh no, it's no fee at all. They're begging for them because nobody wants to do it.
Wait,
liability's too much.
You said you were raised by carnies? Was that a joke? If that's not a joke, we need to hear about this.
There's nothing more fun than carnies with cash. We'll just kind of leave it at that. But no, actually, in carnival in Brazil, I grew up in Brazil. Went to high school in Brazil, so that's where the carnival tie goes in, I guess.
Oh, wait, why are you here?
Where?
Yeah, if you grew up in Brazil, why aren't you how are you in the States if you grew up in Brazil? Brazil is beautiful.
It's like another country.
It is.
It's like a whole nother country.
Yeah, they speak pork and cheese there. Um, Brazil actually, I think, is going through a little bit of time right now. But when I was there in the 80s, early 80s, going to high school, my folks were teachers in the American schools. So I spent 3 years there and got pretty fluent in Portuguese and really embraced the culture, loved it. It was a great time and learned a lot and really learned a lot about international relations and some of that when you look at the American school and the embassies. See, Brasilia was where I was at. So that was like Washington, D.C. So it was a capital. And so all the embassy kids from various countries, I think there was 70 different countries in the American school in Brasilia, from all the embassies and all the stuff. So literally when I was in high school, I was going to house parties in Italy, Russia, I think we were at the Iraq embassy once back in the 80s. So, that idea of that international flavor, was really an interesting segue, maybe even into a career of just being able to really talk with people and understand languages and what they're saying and the nuances of the culture. I'd love to go back. I think there's, kind of depending on where you go in Brazil, there's some problems now, but it is a beautiful country and miss it.
Little known fact, Maldonado is Portuguese for bad note taker.
Do that. Yeah, wow. I think there's something to do with the snake in that, right?
Uh-huh.
That's right. But it also means butt draws great snakes.
That's right.
I need to know about the amusement ride though.
Yeah. So I tell you that I failed more carnival rides than I ever passed, probably, and I quit doing it, and I'd never put my kids on them. And I guess that's the short answer. So you guys that have kids, that's really what you want to know.
That settles it.
And if they got the sticker on there,
sorry, Liam.
If they got the
You're
sticker
ruining our summer.
and they got their insurance and certification, all that, and sure, you look at the people, but those things are getting broke down and put up in Walmart parking lots and everything across the country. I mean, just wear and tear on the equipment is that. A lot of things I inspected on the ones I saw, you saw a lot of homemade welds on like scramblers and parts that were broken and welded and stuff. And you're like, man, I'm not a welder. I think I could have welded better beating that. I mean, did you mass spec this? Did you dye penetrate? Right. Where's your non-destructive testing? And that's when the cash starts coming out. Oh, we really need this open for the weekend. I'm like, dude, I've got kids, and if I wouldn't put my kids on that, I am not signing off for other people.
Well, you and I talked about rights, or we talked about the ethics of videos. I mean, putting safety videos online, and I peruse a lot of videos, and one of them I just saw was one where a Ferris wheel was, as it was spinning, one of the little carriages got locked sideways, and so the kids were like huddled up in the little carriage, or whatever you call it, and the amusement ride operator climbed up without any sort of fall protection and ended up falling. Wasn't seriously hurt. I mean, he was still walking when he got to the bottom. He kind of bounced off of the poles and whatnot. I mean, it's probably bruised up, but that kind of segues over to, this topic that we were talking about before about posting these videos online. I think that I was kind of curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, that's I've been framing up kind of a way to do that dialogue and maybe write some articles, but the ethics of the macabre, is how I've really tried to frame it in my mind. And I'll just give you a history of it. When all that video stuff came out in the mid 90s where you could insert it in PowerPoint, Windows 95 changed the world. I quit using overheads and carrying that stuff around and went to a PowerPoint. And so once we started importing videos into that and really kind of starting to play that, it really added a new game changer to giving safety training. Okay. So I think there was a big step change in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s with this, integration of multimedia into safety training. So it wasn't so boring, that's kind of what the whole thing was. And so to try to jazz it up, I think a lot of people try to use these types of video clips to do that. And I think it can be done very successfully. I think it's a great media. However, the struggle that I have is, even back in those days, I really struggled with, I just didn't feel right about showing videos that actually resulted in an injury or fatalities or things like that. Not that I really couldn't stomach it. Again, I'm an airborne infantry dude. So, I'm not squeamish about such things. But to me, the ethics of it is that, one, when I probably made some decisions, to show things that I may not have should have. And the reason I know that is because of the reaction from the crowd. And so when I started on a few things that with the crowd to where I could see some body language of uncomfort, it really made me give me some pause. And these weren't actually videos of people dying or death on the highway or, smoke rolling off of them from
gory stuff.
None of that. But nonetheless, it was starting to really kind of get on the edge where I was sensing from some of my audience members some discomfort there. And the more I started exploring it and the more I thought about it, and the more I started seeing it, and the more I started observing the reactions of audiences when another speaker was showing some of these things, it really, really kind of started solidifying my thoughts on it. And that is one, you don't know who's in your audience or who's going to view that. And I knew that one person that had to physically walk out of a presentation at a safety conference. I think the guy showed the video of the guys in the scaffold got into power lines and they all lit up and they're just smoking. You just sit there and play it. And to the whole thing. And everybody's like going, and it wasn't even aligned with this presentation. It it was so out of place and it was so appalling and it didn't tie to anything. It was purely almost like a shock value thing. And I've seen a few more of those, and I'm thinking to myself, what is our ethics as an educator or as a professional? Not only to respect the people that we're going to show this stuff to. So, hey, this is going to be graphic, put it in the description, don't show up, you don't like that stuff, whatever. That might be one way. But so the audience themselves that could see it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so people without warning, seeing some of these graphic things, I'm concerned that it might be a trigger. And as I work on the 43,000 or 45,001 mental health in the workplace standard, we're starting to look at where does mental health play into this and what sensibilities and sensitivities we have to have. And so one, I don't know the audience and I've seen negative reactions and I've not been able to justify the validity of why to use that in an educational arena. It didn't tie to anything. And so I think that's kind of egregious. So one is the ethics of the people you're delivering it to and the respect for them. And maybe they had a family member that died in a similar fashion, or else they had another related incident that you just triggered and post-traumatic stress or any of that stuff, or another safety professional. You're doing it with a bunch of safety professionals. We all know what electrocution means. To show that to our group really is a moot point. And it's more of the, kind of the sadistic look at it in a way. And so that's part of it. And then I think the other part of it is, do we have permission to use them? When you look at the ethics of plagiarism and having the right of usage, what's really freedom of information? What's a public domain? And so if I have a videotape that I'm showing of somebody getting injured, let's just say somebody's trying to split wood and the axe comes back and smacks them in the face, right? And,
one like that.
So I thought you'd like that one, right? And so, basically, what am I showing that for and to what end? And really that victim that did that, and that video got out, I'm not 100% sure how I could even get permission to show her. And what if she was in the audience when I showed it, or they knew that person. And so now you start getting into humiliation in a way. And it's kind of like when somebody would get injured at work and we'd say, oh, tell everybody about how you got hurt. And it always made me cringe. And there's a lot of people got put on the spot with that. And I just never felt good about sometimes that was handled. If I talked with them privately and it was a discussion and it was their idea, then maybe that's something that we would do. But it kind of exposes people, I guess, in a way. And I wonder the purpose of it and how we're going to tie it into a learning and really what the meaning of it is and why would we use it. And then the other would be, do I really have permission to use that? What about if it were a fatality or that person actually died? Is it kind of disrespectful to their family that I'm putting it out on LinkedIn saying, Darwin Award winner, you can't fix stupid? And that kind of stuff, I think, diminishes our profession. And I think
absolutely. That was by far the most politically correct answer to whether or not we should use those videos that I think I've ever heard. So I'm going to get you to nail down real quick. Should we use those videos in, like, say, a LinkedIn setting to make a point? Should we be using these videos?
I can't prescribe the ethics to everyone. I'm just posing the question. I choose not to. I think that maybe I'll contrast another one where the guy was, looked like he was driving a bus and was kind of cheesing to the camera and turning around, not looking at the road. And then when it panned the camera in, he was being towed, right? Okay. And I think the comment was, okay, for all you safety people that got your blood all boiled up, you need to have all the facts. I thought that was a great use. Now, it still doesn't really resolve the dilemma that I don't have permission from that bus driver to use his face in that format. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to right size that. But I think it's all about respect and just use and fairness. Am I fair to the subject? So it gets into human subjects. So let me put it another way. If I were going to show a video of a fatality where somebody got, say, zapped on the scaffold, back to my other point, there very well could be places where that's appropriate. And the only place I could think that would be appropriate, or just one off the top of my head, is if we had a lot of risk with that exact same situation and we'd extended some other initiatives to try to get them to do whatever, have a spotter or move the scaffold in a different way. And we were really struggling and we were really running some risk, maybe even had a couple close calls to where we really have to reinforce the learning and meaning of the gravity of hazard we have here. And in that case, perhaps some footage or things like that with as a case study in a real moderated way with a very succinct point tied right back into call to action of what those workers need to do to prevent this very specific thing as it relates to their work. To me, that starts getting into a relevancy. It's relevant now. And it becomes really, I know Nate's a soldier, in soldier, you put them on death ground. You put them on death ground. You either do this right or you're dying. High risk. And I think that in that high risk work environment, the people that are in that, those types of videos to show that in a certain phase or whatever may have some meaning and have some positive impact and affect their behavior. But generally, I tend not to want to use those at all. At best, maybe a near miss to where we could speculate and you could absolutely understand where if we would have zigged instead of zagged, it would have been really bad. And I think the key is protecting somebody who's been injured to any degree or a obvious fatality or somebody that could have. That's where I think we really start really pushing up, I think, an ethical line of usage and do we really have the right to use that person's image, voice, situation, and then to what end? How are we using it? If we're using it to ridicule and say Darwin Award and all that kind of stuff, I think that everybody's pretty clear that that's not a good way to do that, but yet it exists. But I think we just have to be really careful. And then also how much, the saturation point to where it becomes, very cliched or where it really has any meaning it may have held is now gone. And then also you need to be prepared to really explain the meaning or the reason for using that and how it ties into a real specific, very succinct, very powerful learning moment to just say, yeah, you can't predict everything, or just say, you can't, your decisions or your behavior doesn't always mean you're not going to get hurt. I think some of those real anecdotal, I guess what I would suggest to be really low, shallow comments, I don't know that they really warrant the usage of such, dramatic, depictions of somebody being hurt or injured. And so I think we just as a profession need to show a little more empathy and respect for victims and the second victim, somebody who might have had somebody get hurt. And I just don't know that those videos do what we might think they're intended to do.
Well,
so I don't use them in public forum anymore. But I'll tell you how I do use them, and this will be a dirty secret for all of us. So don't air this. We'll have to cut this out.
Oh, we don't.
In the ethics of the macabre, as safety professionals, I think generally we do have some fascination with these events, and I think to study them, and I don't look at all of them, but every once in a while I'll catch one and I'll look at it, and I find myself really thinking through what all possibly systematically could have led to that point. And so when I choose to watch a few of those things, I'm putting it into a very analytical mind and almost living vicariously as an academic in the field, as a theorist and as a philosopher, and just saying, okay, how could I think through this could happen? And to me personally, professionally, to look at some of that, not because I'm into the gore, not because I'm into that, and I feel for the people that are in there, I have deep empathy for them, but as a professional, I find my mind circling through our professional trade craft on a certain video like that, graphic or not, and really trying to make meaning in my own mind of how it could get to this point. And I think that that reflection and that self thought of a professional using that, in that way, perhaps that has some value to us as professionals with our fascination in our profession and prevention. And maybe to better understand prevention, we have to go through some exercises of living through some of these events and really thinking and speculating heavily about how that could get to that point. And I may not use it or share it outside of my own mind, but I think that thinking skill activity of thinking through that, it's a deductive analysis. You're looking at a fault tree. You have a top event of failure, and you're breaking down that event of failure. I think that mental exercise may have some merit within a professional development internally with an individual, or maybe even a small group. If the four of us were to discuss one of those videos as a case study, and we had an open discussion, that might be a good use of it. But I tend not to use them, in a public forum. But I will admit my guilty pleasure of I do look at some of them just from an inquiring mind.
Yeah, well, see, here's the thing is I have to disagree with you. I think that there is value to sharing them in a public forum. I think that there's an important differentiation between using something that's a shock effect or something that's disrespectful, like if somebody lost their life, right? But if somebody just gave themselves a bruise in the forehead, should we take down America's Funniest Home Videos too? I mean, is that unethical?
No,
it drives good conversation. So let me give an example since we used that example. In one of the things that I like to repeat a lot, because good communication, you have to repeat many times in order to kind of drive the point home. And so I was, for example, in that video using that to try to push the narrative or the idea that things are not done on purpose. People don't do these things on purpose. And to your point, when people say, "Oh, Darwin Awards," and that person was an idiot and that kind of thing, no, they weren't an idiot. No, it wasn't a Darwin Award. People are not perfect. People are going to make mistakes, and people aren't choosing to get injured because logically, I think it's a logic trap that people fall into. So for me, it's almost like a deprogramming attempt. It's a strong visual example, and I can get a discussion going around it, and I think it serves a very good purpose for that end.
No, I think you're right. I think that does serve a purpose with the right audience. I think we're and you use it well, Nate. I've seen some of your stuff and I've seen your comments, so I'm definitely not. I think you're in a better camp of how you're choosing to use them. But at the end of the day, it doesn't answer the question of am I giving the audience fair warning, and do I have permission from the subject? And I think that's the ethical dilemma that I find with some of those. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to resolve it. But what I would say is that, to use that material, can I use something different to make that point? And does it have to be that particular graphic? And as far as like the Americans' Funniest Home Videos and some of that kind of stuff, or if somebody releases their own blooper of them doing something silly, the Jackass shows and all that kind of stuff. But the difference is that's all consent. The people that are on those American Funniest Videos, they submitted them. They got probably paid for that. And the people, if we tend to use that, or if we use America's Funniest Video clip, do we have permission from the network to use that in our professional practice? So then it gets into a copyright and a plagiarism issue. So again, if we're using things that are clipped off the computer, off the internet, I think that we may be running into some dilemmas with some copyright infringement and usage laws. But then also, if we're showing it to an audience that doesn't know it's coming, or that didn't consent to see it, or didn't realize that it was all there and it wasn't, and they were like say a group of workers in an industry, to where I'm up there giving a presentation and I show this stuff and they had no control over that. All of a sudden, boom, there it was, and you can't unsee it. So I think that goes to the context, Nate, of how and why we would choose and when we would choose to use these. I'm not flat out saying they're all wrong and there's never ever a use for them. I just have seen a lot of what, in my opinion, is misuse, and I base that on those two things.
That's
The ethics of the audience and the ethics of the subject person and the subject that we're using.
I think there's a lot of things we got to go back and think about now, on both sides of those discussions. So we're going to try something different to kind of round us out tonight, Dan. This is something that may flop horribly, but we're going to try it anyway. So you're going to have 10 seconds or less, depending on how nice I decide to be, to answer these 4 rapid fire questions. I have no idea what they're going to be, but I'm going to start with Abby. Go ahead, shoot.
10 seconds. Do you know me? Do you know me?
Yeah, well,
Oh my gosh! So I have to pick my question.
Abby,
yes, we know you, Dan,
and that's the
now
reason.
The audience knows you too.
Yeah, that's the reason.
Yep,
get a handle.
It's a challenge.
But
it's a challenge,
or less. But
here we go. Yeah, 10 seconds or less. What certification do you think best predicts or identifies someone who would be a good influencer?
Credentials and tests are just simply.
That was such a fast.
I wasn't counting.
Oh, okay. Good. That was it. Get the hook out.
All right, Nate.
All right, I got one for you, Dan. Yeah. What's your top tip for anyone listening who may be preparing for a certification exam? Number 1 study tip.
Number 1 study tip. I think get a good night's sleep and walk in there like you own the place with total confidence.
Nice. Well done.
And eat a banana. That always helps.
Yeah.
Eat a banana.
Some caffeine,
carbs,
potassium,
coffee,
and
coffee, beef jerky,
and 2 bangs if you're Jason Lucas.
Yes,
maybe.
Yeah.
Hey,
I was right there with you today. All right, Jason, you're up.
All right, so quick question. You, with the number of certifications that you have, do you believe that a safety person can be just as effective with 0 certifications and just experience?
Absolutely. I know more of the smartest people that don't have certifications in my career, and I've fired people that have more than I do.
All right, and here's your last question. It's from me, so I don't even know what it's going to be yet. Which one of my cats is more likely to be plotting my death, Mouse or Lucy?
I would say Mouse, because she's quiet and sneaky that way.
Well, I drove her 14 miles under the hood of my car.
Yeah.
Payback's coming for you, Jason.
Oh, yes, she is.
It's just
cats never forgive.
All right, Dan. Dan, you gave us a lot to think about today. I'm gonna give you a second here to find out. I mean, you talked about Span a little bit. I know you sold that to Click Safety last year. So in the next 2 minutes and 30 seconds, if you can give us a little bit of where you are now, where we can find you and all of that.
Yeah, well, the rumor is that I retired. That's just not true. I got too much fire left in me in this business. And so trying to give it back. I'm pretty active on committees. I'm working on the Z490 training standard right now, and we're about to ramp that up. Speaking at different places. I've got a couple books I'm writing on, actually an exam prep book, 90 Days to Certification, but that's a working title, and going to publish through ASSP. So I'm really interested in that. It's going to be all the top ideas and thousands of interviews put together. And the goal is that I can really line out a study plan. So when I have, so when there's test takers like our friend Jason that doesn't take it in 2 years, they might be able to pick up that book and kind of refresh on how to get started again. And really the most important points. So a little bit of author and book writing, and I've got several articles in the works that I'm going to publish. So speaking and publishing are going to be a big part of where I'd like to give back, and into the research, looking at some companies that are wanting to do some real research with this idea of influence and leadership development. So I've got a few consulting clients that are pretty big global once that starts back up after the COVID thing. And then the bigger one is some mentoring. And so I've got an LMS I'm building that's going to be a real interesting by professionals for professionals, a learning management system to where a lot of the questions that you guys asked me today, I'm going to try to address, in that forum and have resources and some webinars and webcasts and different virtual learnings along it that we're developing. So I've got a few companies that are just having us put all their stuff on LMS. They're tired of the LMSs they're working on, and a bunch of people that don't understand safety that are designers. And so we thought there might be an opportunity to have a learning management system dedicated to safety and health professionals that are written and designed by safety health professionals. So I figured I'd put the doctorate of education to use and apply it to the betterment of the profession. So hopefully for the next 15 years that I've got planned on working in the profession, it'll be a lot more of speaking, authoring, and knowledge work and research, and hopefully give back in the form of consulting and guidance and mentoring and those kinds of things.
Awesome. Well, sounds like you don't have very much to do.
No. I've been fishing for the last month. I pretty much dropped off the planet for like a month.
All right, Dan. Well, we really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for sticking around, and we will see you again on the next episode of Safety Justice League.
The views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the hosts and their guests, not necessarily their employer, organization, committee, or any other group or individual on this planet or any yet to be discovered containing intelligent life. The podcast is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing within this recording is intended to be used as legal guidance or representation of any entity. No portion of the podcast may be reproduced without the express written consent of the show's creator, Safety Justice League, LLC. But hey, ask us nicely. We'll probably share.